India. I've covered stuff there before. I love their steam, and a lot of it lasted in service for on average 40 years, if not more in some cases. But there is one that outlasted them all, and it's not even steam powered. The Great Indian Peninsula Railway was one of the great Raj-era railways, running fast services from the coast at Bombay inland to places like Pune, where the famous Pune horse races were held. Between these stood the Western Ghats, the mountain range that led to India's Deccan Plain. The GIPR built one of the most impressive feats of engineering to conquer Ghat, the mountain pass chosen by the railway to cross the mountains, but with several reversing stations, where trains would have to be split and locomotives turned. It wasn't the most ideal solution to the problem. By the 1920s, a plan was hatched. The reversing stations were abandoned, new tunnels were constructed, and most importantly for a mainline railway with mountain grades, overhead wires were strung up, and the Swiss Locomotive and Machine Works, with Metrovic from the UK, came together to make a new locomotive for the railway, the WCG-1. Originally classified EF1, 41 were built to be used exclusively on the Great Indian Peninsula's main line for freight duties. This of course had nothing to do with the fact that this was the only broad-gauge electrified main line in India at the time. The locomotives could be seen working heavy freight trains along with proving banking/helper duties on Ghats less steep, but still 3% grade, to assist heavy freights along with passenger trains, which were now in the hands of the also Swiss/Metrovic built EA1s. The EF1s were quite popular and reliable, and it's little surprise they gained a nickname. An electric locomotive with two sloping hoods and side rods? What could that nickname be? That's right! Crab. While the rest of the world usually nicknamed these engines as crocodiles because of the aforementioned features, India took to calling the EF1s crabs, reportedly because of their rods in motion while moving, and how well they tended to go around curves on the grades. By the time of independence, the crabs were still running. In fact, them and the EA1 and its passenger siblings were still the only electric traction on the broad gauge. India's massive AC electric network wouldn't see its first train until 1959. Over time, this would eventually reach the west coast of India, and after a long time coming, the GIPR DC wires would be replaced with AC, but we're jumping a bit too far ahead. Before we keep going, I feel like it'd be a bit helpful to discuss the Indian Railways classification system for modern traction, something the GIPR electrics fell into. The classifications are like so: 3 letters and 1 number. The first letter denotes for the gauge, in this case W, which stands for wide, broad. The second letter denotes the traction type, C, which was used for DC because diesels took the D prefix. And finally, the third letter denotes the use of the locomotive, in this case G, which stands for goods/freight. The number is self-explanatory, with the lower the number meaning the older the locomotive, the higher the number being the newer the locomotive. Continuing on, by 1970 the WCP-1 and WCP-2, a larger version, were nearing retirement. The 1950s and 60s had seen an influx of the WCM class locomotives take over passenger service. These were British or Japanese built, excluding the at the time new WCM-5, which was India's first home-brewed electric locomotive, being developed and constructed in-house. Meanwhile, the EF1, now WCG-1, continued tolling away on freight and helper duties. They were still reliable, but were over 40 years old at this point. This led to the introduction of WCG-2, which entered service in 1971 and made the WCG-1s look like toys, with up-to-date electronic systems, double the horsepower, and the cool nickname of the Howlers because of their loud blower motors. These beasts would continue to serve on the DC system, especially as helpers on Ghat, until 2010 when the AC wires went live. For most old equipment, this would have been the end. But Indian Railways decided not to let go of the WCG-1s just yet, taking some to Bombay and some to Locomotive on the other side of the Ghats to be used for shunting. While Locomotive was a mixed bag of passengers and goods shunting, Bombay engines were used mostly for shuffling empty passenger trains to and from the impressive Victoria terminus, along with other odd jobs. This is the job these engines would continue to perform through the rest of the 1970s and into the 1980s, outlasting the WCP-1s and 2s, and the arrival of the first DC-AC locomotives that would start being used for long-distance trains off the old GIPR, the WCAM-1s. By 1992, the WCG-1s were over 60 years old. The last few ran out their miles with little fanfare, working empty passenger movements in Bombay, and by the end of the year all were out of service, although there is conflicting information. as some sources say the Lonvala engines were retired in 1992, while the Bombay passenger shunters continued into 1995. Either way, after retirement, Indian Railways preserved two examples. The first, 4502, named Sir Leslie Wilson after the reigning viceroy at the time of delivery, was preserved shortly after replacement by the WCG-2s, and currently resides with the preserved WCP-1 at Delhi's National Railway Museum. Another is preserved nearby to Mumbai's CST terminus, the former Victoria terminus. It is planned that this engine will be involved in this year's events for 100 years of electrification in India. There's always lots to talk about with steam that lasts in service longer than anyone expected, but less for electrics and especially diesels. The WCG-1s definitely deserve the recognition. Thanks for watching. I thought this would be a fun video to get away from the steam for just a little bit. The next one might not be steam either, but we'll see. Also because this year marks 100 years of electric traction in India, so I thought it'd be a good idea to do this for one of my favorite classes of electric locomotive. Steam will come back in the future though, I promise. Thanks for watching.